This is GM Word of the Week, and I'm Fiddleback. Shrine. If there's one thing that we here at the Word of the Week stand for, it's precision. Precision, of course, comes from the Latin. It means to cut off, or, more precisely, to cut before. Just as excise means to cut out, and circumcise means to cut around, precise means to cut before. But idiomatically, it means to cut out questions before they arise, to cut out abstraction, to cut out ambiguity, and to cut short. Well, we don't enjoy cutting things short so much. But we do like to be precise, even in areas where others might think precision fears to tread, like religion. For example, you might not think it's too important to know the difference between a temple and a shrine. But if you're in Japan, and you get temples and shrines confused, you might end up making a fool of yourself by clapping at the wrong time, or revering the wrong spiritual being. See, the D&D universe is... Oh yeah, don't worry, we're coming back to that temple and shrine thing. But first, the greater context, by which I mean the gaming context. See, the D&D universe is a fantasy role-playing game universe filled with ancient runes and places of power and strange gods and mystical forces. And that means it's chock-a-block full... What? Chock-a-block? Right. It's a fun little phrase of British origin with a nautical twist. It means completely filled. It is actually a mutation of an earlier phrase, chock-full. See, originally, the phrase was full to choking, or choke-full. That makes sense. But then the word choke gave rise to the name of a little wooden wedge that was used to secure things and keep them from sliding or rolling around. You know, a chock. The thing you stick under the wheels of a cannon or under a barrel stored on its side, or under a door to keep it from closing. Well, the phrase became chock-full to indicate the ship was full to choking with cargo. But that wasn't the end. See, ships also use pulley systems to lift and move heavy cargo. Those pulleys are called blocks, and you could string several of them together to lift more and heavier cargo. But string too many of them together, and there's no slack left on the rope. So, if your ship is full to choking with cargo that's been chocked and your blocks are holding everything they can and you can't fit even one more piece of cargo, you are, in the words of novelist Frédéric Chaumier, in his 1832 book, The Life of a Sailor, chock-a-block. But we digress, and if you'll kindly stop interrupting, hypothetical listener who we are shamelessly using as a rhetorical device, we can get on with the real subject of the episode. The D&D universe is chock-a-block full of shrines and temples and churches and chapels and cathedrals and holy sites of every variety. It's to the point that most GMs just use the words pretty much interchangeably. What is a ruined shrine to one GM is an ancient temple to another, and a dilapidated cathedral to a third. And sure, it's just fantasy religion in a non-existent fictional world filled with dragons and things to you. But that imprecision really bugs us. Take, for example, two words that get interchanged a lot in D&D that definitely aren't synonyms. Take pantheons and pantheism. Most gamers understand that the list of deities that rule over the imaginary cosmos is called a pantheon. But some gamers make some pretty foolish mistakes when it comes to the specifics. So let's hash that one out first. Pantheons come from the Greek word pan, meaning all, and theos, meaning deity. So a pantheon is all of the deities. Specifically, a pantheon is all of the deities worshipped by particular people or as part of a particular religion. On Earth, we can talk about ancient mythological pantheons like the Norse pantheon or the Greek pantheon, and we can discuss the pantheons of contemporary faiths like the Hindu pantheon or the Shinto pantheon. What's important to note is that a pantheon is a feature of a polytheistic religion. Poly, of course, meaning many. So polytheism is the belief in many deities. Contrast that with monotheistic beliefs like Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, which recognize only one single deity as the true divinity, though they do often leave room in their faith for other supernatural and divine beings. In most polytheistic religions, Each of the different deities has a different sphere of influence or represents specific natural or supernatural forces. Most of us will be familiar with the idea of Zeus as the god of storms in the heavens, Poseidon as the god of the earth and the sea, and Athena as the goddess of wisdom and knowledge. Well, that's polytheism in a nutshell. And that's the first major gaffe a lot of gamers make. Remember that one jerk you used to play D&D with whose cleric refused to heal anyone that didn't worship his particular god? That's a complete misunderstanding of polytheism. In polytheism, all of the gods exist, and they are all accepted. Each deity is called upon for specific reasons. You made offerings to Ares if you wanted to bless your army before a military campaign. But you wouldn't call upon Ares to make your crops grow. He's a soldier, not a farmer. Now, while the roles of priests in particular religions vary from faith to faith, generally speaking, a polytheistic faith can feature priests who are generalists and know the proper rites to offer the correct deities for various functions, or priests who serve specific gods, often as caretakers of their temples in addition to performers of rituals, or both. And while there were definitely rivalries between particular deities in various faiths, like Athena and Ares, it would be very odd for a priest to try and garner exclusive worship of his deity over all others. The point is this: in the D&D world, there is usually just one religion. That religion is a polytheistic religion with a pantheon of gods. But that religion is not pantheistic. See, while pantheon refers to a list of deities, pantheism refers to a completely different belief structure. In pantheism, the belief is that whatever deity you believe in, that deity is everything. In other words, the God and the universe are one. Now, there are lots of ways this can work. Material pantheists hold that the universe is the body of the Supreme Being, that is, God is the universe. Idealistic pantheists hold that the God is the mind of the universe, in the same way that the human mind is the mind of a human body. And while many Eastern religions have some origins in pantheism, modern pantheism actually grew out of 17th century rationalism and philosophy. See, once upon a time, there was a philosopher named René Descartes. And Descartes had a problem. He couldn't figure out whether anything actually existed. See, the problem was, according to Descartes, that he had to rely on his senses to tell him everything about the world. But senses could be fooled. You could hallucinate things. You could imagine things. How could he be sure anything really existed and wasn't just a delusion? Well, he realized that if he was capable of doubting the existence of anything, he was capable of independent thought. And that meant, at the very least, his own mind must exist. In other words, because he could think, he, himself, must exist. And that was summed up in his famous line, cogito ergo sum, which is Latin for I think, therefore I am. Ultimately, René Descartes derived the idea of dualism, that a human being comes in two parts. First, all humans have a physical body that is part of the physical universe. Second, all human beings have a non-physical consciousness called the mind that somehow controls the body. He did have some weird ideas about the mechanics of that, and it involved basically anchoring the soul to the pineal gland in the physical brain, but that's not important here. What is important is to understand that Descartes wasn't talking about the physical brain. The physical brain was part of the physical body. The human mind was a different thing altogether. What is also important to know is that René Descartes also invented graphing things on X, Y, and Z axes. So ultimately, he is responsible for graph paper, which every gamer should be grateful for. And he also invented a toy submarine that rises and falls on its own due to changes in internal fluid pressure. That part isn't important either, it's just neat. Anyway, in Holland, there was another philosopher named Baruch Spinoza, and he was not a fan of Descartes. In his view, there was no difference between the mind and the body. He held a monist view. The physical body and the human mind are the same thing. In other words, you don't need more than a physical brain to make a conscious thinking human. He wrote his response to Descartes in a massive book that was published after his death called Ethics. He became the premier rationalist philosopher of his day. He also laid the groundwork for modern pantheism, the idea that any deity that exists is indistinct from the universe that it rules over. And, as the Enlightenment caught hold, Spinozan pantheism became all the rage among philosophers, scholars, scientists, and mathematicians, who all took the view that any divine truths about the universe could be revealed by studying the universe itself. Albert Einstein himself once said that the God he believed in was a Spinozan God, one whose true nature could only be revealed through the scientific study of the universe. But we digress. The point is, pantheons are features of polytheism, not pantheism. And what about that thing about temples and shrines in Japan? Well, in Japan, religion is a bit different from the way we in the West view it. In the United States, for example, those of a religious bent generally pick one religion and stick with it. In Japan, some people do that, but others drift back and forth between two different religions that peacefully coexist. The two major religions in Japan are Shintoism and Buddhism. The Shinto faith, also called the Way of the Kami, appeared in Japan as early as the 6th century BCE. But it's kind of hard to track down the origins precisely. Shinto seems to have no founder, no sacred texts or scriptures, and no formalized doctrine. Shinto has some interesting features, though. First of all, it is polytheistic in a sense, and it is also pantheistic in a sense. According to the Shinto faith, the world is filled with sacred spirits called kami, which take the form of both natural features and forces and ideals and concepts. All human beings become kami when they die. But there are also major kami, who are analogous to the deities of other polytheistic religions. Amaterasu, the sun goddess, is generally considered to be the most important kami. In Shinto, there are no absolutes of right and wrong. Most people are fundamentally good-natured, but evil spirits can lead people astray. Thus, most Shinto rituals are concerned with warding against evil spirits, driving them out, and making offerings to the kami for protection. Shinto shrines are believed to be the homes of the kami. Each shrine houses a sacred object that represents the kami. Those objects are generally housed in an inner chamber of the shrine and generally not looked upon by anyone. However, most shrines celebrate Matsuri festivals at specific times of the year, times considered sacred to the particular kami of the shrine. And during those festivals, the kami itself may be paraded through the town. Shinto shrines also have some common architectural features. First, there is the torii gate at the entrance to the shrine. This freestanding arch has two vertical posts and wooden crosspieces at the top, and is generally made of wood and painted orange and black. Often, the torii gate is flanked by koma-inu, statues of guardian animals such as dogs, lions, or foxes. Just inside the entrance, there will be a fountain where visitors can clean their hands and mouth to purify themselves before they enter the main hall. The shrine will include not only a main hall, where the inner chamber of the kami is located, but also an offering hall where visitors can make prayers and offerings. And visitors can also write wishes and prayers on wooden plates called ima, and leave them at the shrine. Whereas Shinto is a uniquely Japanese faith, Buddhism was actually imported to Japan via China and Korea during the 6th century CE, though it did not gain wide acceptance until the Nara period. In fact, certain militant monastic sects of Buddhism became so politically powerful in the city of Nara that the capital of Japan was actually moved from Nara to Nagaoka in 784 CE and then to Kyoto in 794 CE. Buddhism maintained a strong influence over Japanese politics until Oda Nobunaga succeeded in unifying much of Japan and, along with his general Toyotomi Hideyoshi, all but exterminated the most militant of Buddhist sects in the late 1500s. During the same period, Nobunaga also expelled all Christian missionaries in order to protect native Japanese traditions from the disrespect of foreign faiths. While Buddhism is a complex religion with many sects, it began with the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama. Buddhism does not generally involve the reverence of gods, but it does involve paying homage and showing gratitude to the enlightened scholars who have helped teach its practices. Now, we've discussed Buddhism before, but to sum up, the core of Buddhism is that if you lead a good life and seek enlightenment, you can escape the cycle of death and rebirth that keeps you chained to this world of illusion. In Japan, Buddhist places of worship are called temples. These temples also tend to have particular architectural features in common. They also have gates, but the gates tend to be more elaborate and follow traditional Chinese architecture rather than Japanese architecture. In addition, temples also include a pagoda, a Chinese-style structure with either 3 or 5 stories that evolved from the stupa of Indian architecture. The pagoda generally houses a representation of a bit of the remains of the Buddha, such as a tooth. Buddhist temples also generally include a bell, which will be rung 108 times on New Year's Eve to represent the Buddhist concept that there are 108 worldly desires that must be overcome. And Buddhist temples will include a main hall and a lecture hall. And because most cemeteries in Japan are Buddhist, most are found on the grounds of a Buddhist temple. What is interesting is that both Buddhism and Shinto are extremely tolerant of other beliefs, and both espouse a generally positive view of humanity as capable of overcoming evil influences and desires to attain a higher state of being. Thus, the two faiths are remarkably compatible and, apart from some early growing pains and political turmoil, have peacefully coexisted in Japan for centuries. Even after Shinto was made the state religion during the Meiji period, Buddhism continued to have a strong influence in the country. And shortly after World War II, the Japanese government decreed that Shinto was no longer the official state religion of Japan. Thus, many folks in Japan identify as members of both faiths, Shinto and Buddhist. They participate in Shinto festivals, for example, and pray to Kami, but they also participate in Buddhist funerary rites and bury their loved ones in Buddhist cemeteries. As for the clapping thing, well, Shinto prayers tend to be noisy, boisterous affairs to get the attention of the Kami. Thus, it is appropriate to clap before Shinto prayers. But Buddhism is a faith of quiet inner contemplation, and silence is preferred. So if you mix up your temples and your shrines, you're going to make a major spiritual faux pas. So what is the difference between a temple and a shrine? Well, a temple is a place for worship. It's a building. A shrine, however, is regarded as a sacred place because it is usually associated with a particular relic or being, like the representation of a particular kami, or a holy relic, or the remains of a saint or martyr. In short, it's a place where something has been enshrined. It comes from the Latin scrinium, which refers to a chest or box for holding important books or documents. That said, a shrine is really just a receptacle for a sacred object. In many polytheistic faiths, it is not uncommon for some people to have shrines to particular gods in their homes or businesses, or even for deceased ancestors or loved ones. But a temple is a big old building for worship, prayer, or religious practices. Now, that said, the words have been blurred over the years, and many people use the two interchangeably. And even in Japan, where the distinction is important, they aren't using the words quite right. After all, the Buddhist pagoda is as much a shrine as the inner chamber of the Shinto shrine. And the Shinto shrine complex is as much a temple as the Buddhist temple. But then, it's unfair to hold that against them. After all, they don't use the English words temple and shrine. They call them otera and jinja, because they speak Japanese. As for what use this precision might be in your game, well, we promise not to harangue you about calling your temples shrines and vice versa. If you promise not to have your polytheists behave like monotheists, and never ever call your polytheists pantheists. Deal? This has been the GM Word of the Week. It was written by the Angry GM and recorded and produced by me, Fiddleback. You can find more at theangrygm.com and madadventurers.com.